नहीं आराम से जा रहे हो।
Just check how many people have come in.
Okay.
Yeah, and we can start.
So there are participants, so they might be able to listen to us. There are 24 of them as of now.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
So a big hello to everyone.
Yeah,
But
hello,
I
sir.
guess, hello. So the participants can hear what we say just now?
Yeah, sir. Participants can hear you, but they won't be able to respond.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. So just wanted to know so that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Pooja Vaswani, for your feedback. So as we are waiting to begin, I am told that there are already 25 people who are online and connected. So during my talk, I want you to use your chat section and ask questions so that we'll see if we can answer some of them. And I'm also wanting to make this my talk a bit interactive. So I might ask a few questions. So use your chat section of Zoom to give quick answers. We'll see how it works. Do we want to put on the title slide of the Mother's Day slide?
Yes, sir. I will just share.
So you can share your.
You can share the screen, or even I'm having one slide.
Yeah, and just let's put it on slideshow. Yep. Have we got Arshia on board as a panelist to handle questions?
I don't know, sir. I can't see her.
No, sir. Till now, if we are having his ID, so we can just add in the panelist group.
So she must have joined us now. Has she joined?
Jay, can you just check if she has joined or not?
No, sir, yet not joined. I'm waiting from them only.
Okay, let me talk to her and check. Yeah, so Arshia is just joining.
Okay, sir, no problem.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So Arshia is not yet on board.
No, sir. It's A Fatima.
No, no.
Ah,
Okay.
she comes. I think is Arshia itself. Let me just ask her again.
Yeah, she is there.
There.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
So just make her a panelist. Then we are set to begin.
Yes, sir. Done.
Yeah, who shared the
Uh,
screen just now?
Okay. Yeah. That's fine. So I think we have her on board as well. Hello, Arshia.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah.
Sir, बोल मुझे बोल.
So I think we can start.
Give it 2 minutes more.
Okay.
It's yet to be 6. How many people are online? Participants?
So it's 75 right now.
Okay.
So total 80, including the panelist member.
Okay.
81, it's growing per second. It's
Yeah,
growing.
yeah. So we'll just wait for 2 minutes more, 2-3 minutes, and then start.
Mm,
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Is Neha a panelist or she's not?
So Neha is not a panelist. I'm Abhishek
Okay.
from Air Organics. So I'm just
Oh, okay, okay. That's Abhishek. Okay. Okay. Hi.
hi sir.
So maybe we can start, Abhishek.
Yes, sir. I think we are
Yeah.
almost
I
95.
guess so. So at least sure. So
Okay. So I'll start.
yes, you can share your screen and
Yeah, sir, that's my screen. I think, is it visible to all? It's Mayor Happy Mother's Day and
yes.
Pregna Care logo. Okay. So hello, good evening everyone. A warm welcome to you for today's webinar on motherhood and pregnancy care. I'm Dr. Sanchita Singh, Chief Executive of Spina Bifida Foundation, Mumbai. Spina Bifida Foundation is a charitable trust where we work for prevention, care and support of children with birth defects, especially neural tube defects. We have presence of our NGO activities in 14 Indian states. We also have a national helpline. For more details, I request you to visit our website. Firstly, on behalf of Spina Bifida Foundation and Mayor Organics, we would like to wish a very happy Mother's Day to all of you. Pregnancy and motherhood are the most important phases in a woman's life. Hence, today's Mother's Day has gained a lot of significance, especially in today's pandemic situation, where many women are worried about their pregnancy phase. So today, we have most esteemed faculty with us who will be presenting about the pregnancy care and about birth defects. Firstly, I would like to welcome Dr. Santosh Karmarkar, who will be presenting on common birth defects. Dr. Santosh Karmarkar is a senior consultant pediatric surgeon. He is presently working at Lilavati Hospital and Research Center as a senior consultant. He is also founder trustee of Spina Bifida Foundation, Mumbai. He is a former associate professor of unit in charge of Bai Wadia Children's Hospital. He is also visiting fellowships and professorships of various international institutes like British Council, DFID, visiting professor in United Kingdom. He has also done visiting fellowship for fetal surgery unit recently in Katowice, Poland in 2019. So I welcome Dr. Santosh Karmarkar. Please join us for the webinar. Over to Dr. Karmarkar.
A very, very good evening to all of you. Sanchita, can we have my slide,
Yes, sir.
please?
Yeah.
At the outset, let me thank Mayor Vita Biotics and the Spina Bifida Foundation for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today, although not face to face, but certainly through a webinar, which is so much more easy and convenient. I also want to thank Sanchita, who is the CEO of the foundation, for her kind introduction. Next, please. Next slide. So on behalf of the foundation, no, the previous slide, please. On behalf of the foundation, in 2020, we had made big plans, and we were to launch a very ambitious and very widespread campaign for creating more awareness about prevention and care of birth defects. And this was to be launched at a program which we had organized on World Birth Defects Day, which happens on 3rd of March every year. So at this program, our chief guest was to be the health minister of Maharashtra state. Half an hour before the program, his PA calls me and tells me, sir, it's very difficult for the health minister to attend because he has been summoned to the floor of the assembly to give answers about this new virus called COVID. So I don't know what answers he gave in the assembly at that time. And I don't know whether we have many concrete answers about COVID even now, except for the fact that it's highly infectious. So on 3rd of March, as we were to embark on this program, the program had to be put on hold. Otherwise, by now, we would have had outreach events in 2 or 3 states across India and launched a birth defects registry in the state of Maharashtra. Next slide. Okay, so given the very short time that we have today, I certainly cannot dwell of, all the birth defects, even all the common birth defects. So I will only give you a very important and interesting overview of various aspects of birth defects. We will focus on some of these aspects which are important to obstetricians, and we will focus a little bit more on neural tube defects. I hope, as obstetrics is one of the specialties that is, even during the lockdown, all of you are regularly working. My wife is an anesthetist, so she too has to go to do cases. And the most commonest cases she has done in the lockdown are cesareans and deliveries. So you are a specialty which has been working. I hope you are safe, you are healthy, and you are using your PPEs very well. Of course, we'll have the next speaker to discuss those aspects with you. During this talk, I want to also try and make it interactive. Usually in my talk, I ask a few questions to the audience and seek answers, especially when it's a face-to-face talk. I am going to try that in a webinar format as we go along in this lecture. And so please use your chat section of the Zoom software to ask questions and see if you can give a couple of quick answers to the small interesting questions that I may ask. Next slide, please. Okay, so all of you know about this birth defect. It is one of the top 3. Cleft lip, cleft palate is one of the top 3 birth defects in this country. And it is eminently treatable, eminently curable. And it does have a certain connection with neural tube defects, because I'm sure some of you know that cleft lip palate can also be prevented with folic acid to a large extent. There have been papers talking about prevention of cleft lip palate with folic acid. And I have seen about 3 cases who had a neural tube defect and a cleft lip, cleft palate deformity. Next, please. Okay, can go back to the previous slide. Okay. So in this slide, you also see something which is mentioned called Smile Pinky. And probably all of you know Smile Train, which is, do you know what is Smile Train? I'm going to pause for 4 seconds and see whether some answers come in. Smile Pinky is an Oscar-winning documentary made some years back about a girl with her cleft lip deformity. And this girl was named Pinky and was from Uttar Pradesh. But do you know what Smile Train? I'm still waiting for some answers. Arshia, do we have any answers?
No, sir, not yet.
Okay, I'm sure people have heard of that, and maybe they're not using the chat section much. But Smile Train is one of the biggest international NGOs which helps treatment of cleft lip palate across the world. And hundreds and thousands, maybe lakhs and millions of children have been helped by Smile Train. Okay, next slide, please. This is something which I'm sure all obstetricians have seen, have encountered. And of course, this need not be a question. Everybody knows about anencephaly. Anencephaly is a type of neural tube defect, and 50% of neural tube defects are anencephaly. The remaining 50% are spina bifida. So largely, anencephaly and spina bifida make the whole spectrum of neural tube defects. But I have another small question, and to experiment with this interactive format, how many hours can a child who has anencephaly live? Can he be born alive? And if so, how many hours can this child survive? I'm going to again pause for 4 seconds and see whether we get some enthusiastic answers. I'm sure all of you know this. Arshia is keeping track, I hope.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, there's one answer we have got, couple of hours. I can see that too.
Yes.
Any other answer?
No.
No.
Other than that, no.
Okay, just go ahead, Sanchita. Next animation. Okay.
One answer. One
So
more answer is 12
interesting.
hours.
No, not. Yeah. Go
12
back to the
hours, 2
previous slide.
hours.
Yes. So let me summarize the answers. Somebody has said 6 to 8 hours. Some has said 12 hours. some may say 2 hours. But it can be 2 to 3 days. Okay. And here is a picture which you see in this slide of a family from the United States who knew before birth that their fetus, their child has anencephaly, but they wanted to go ahead with the pregnancy. And they said, even if it's 2 or 3 days with our child, we want to spend those 3 days happily. And said, so they took a lot of pictures with their anencephalic baby. This also highlights the fact that a lot depends on how your outlook is towards birth defects. Talking in the context of neural tube defects, unfortunately, the outlook of many a doctor of various specialties is somewhat unduly pessimistic. So it need not be. And towards the end, I'm going to show you some pictures of some of our spina bifida patients and members who are doing so wonderfully well. Next slide. Okay. So birth defects can be of various types. Okay, the ones which are very obvious antenatally are the ones which disturb the body anatomy. That is the structural birth defects. So as obstetricians or as pediatric surgeons, we are immediately concerned and we can antenatally start thinking about the structural birth defects. The functional and metabolic birth defects are not so obvious antenatally. I mean, sometimes you may suspect because there is a family history of a metabolic disorder, but otherwise, it is mainly the structural birth defects which are picked up antenatally. And these are the ones which, as a pediatric surgeon, I deal with most often. The top 3 or 4 birth defects that we see in India, the topmost is neural tube defects, congenital heart defects, CTEV, and then cleft lip palate. Then you see the bottom of this line, there is a whole spectrum of birth defects which can be talked about: hypospadias, tracheoesophageal fistulas, diaphragmatic hernias, and some of the common ones like uropathies, obstructive uropathies, hydronephrosis, etc., etc. We don't have time to go into all these birth defects, but I'm sure that we will soon have, under the organization by Spina Bifida Foundation and Mayor Vita Biotics, we'll have a few more webinars to deal with specific birth defects, where we can look at some of these birth defects in little more detail. And please be on the lookout for announcements about such webinars. Webinars have opened our eyes to the fact that it's so convenient, it's so cost effective. I'm sure you are all in your casuals with a cup of tea listening to this talk. So for me also, unfortunately, I can't drink my cup of tea. It's going to become cold by the time I finish this talk. But webinars is the way to go. Next, please. Let's look at, we discussed types of birth defects. What are the ways in which birth defects happen? How do birth defects happen? Why do they happen? The process by which malformations take place is known as teratogenesis. And there have been a lot of environmental disasters. COVID-19 also you could call an environmental factor. I don't know whether it causes birth defects, probably not, but who knows? There will be papers saying there's an increased incidence of some birth defect, COVID positive mothers. But teratogenesis is a process by which you get malformations. And an eminent example of this was the thalidomide disaster, which all of you are aware about. Then there, apart from in the environmental factors, an interesting correlation with a relatively common birth defect called hypospadias is with maternal progesterone, which is given by obstetricians to plenty of pregnant women. So there is evidence and papers correlating progesterone with hypospadias. Hypospadias is where the urinary meatus is placed proximally in a boy. You can, of course, have a variety of female hypospadias. But so these are some what we would consider environment of the fetus in this regard. Then we have some genetic ones, and to a large extent, things like tricuspidal fistula, diabetic hernia, and exomphalos, and these can be multifactorial. Next, please. Okay, here are pictures of the deformities which happened in children. A large amount of them, most of them were born with stunted upper limbs, phocomelia, and this is the thalidomide tragedy. Just Sanchita, you can go on. Okay, so this is environmental teratogenesis and the thalidomide disaster. We probably were not there during the thalidomide disaster, but all of us are quite aware of the Bhopal gas tragedy, which happened in 1984. And lots of women gave birth to children with congenital birth defect. And this has been eminently and documented widely. Recently, we had the Vishakhapatnam gas tragedy a few days back, and I hope that is not as bad as the Bhopal gas tragedy for birth defects. But I'm sure some pregnant women who inhaled that gas, especially in their first trimester, may give rise to some children with birth defects. Next, please. Here are a series of pictures of another birth defect, which looks very ghastly when the child is born, when all the intestines and the liver are outside the abdominal wall and only covered with a thin parchment-like membrane. And this is known as exomphalos major. But believe me, there are no major worries. I have not had the necessity to operate and do some heroic surgeries on any of these that I have seen in the last 15 years. All it requires is patience, a small indigenously made contraption called a silo, and you can see pictures of that silo which we have made. We keep tightening the silo, and slowly nature completes its job which has remained incomplete. And here is a girl who then grew up, and at the age of 8 or 9 came to me and said, "Doctor, all is wonderful, but I have this scar which is going from the top of my abdomen to the bottom, and I want to get rid of this scar, and I want some nice plastic surgery done for that." So some birth defects do not require fancy treatment and big surgeries. It requires just good experience, good application of the knowledge of embryology to take care of them. A brief mention about scars. As pediatric surgeons, we cause a lot of scars on various, especially abdomen, chest, of a lot of babies who grow up, and at the age of 3, 4, 5, 6, they keep asking, what is this car? And my friends keep asking. So all I tell them is, this is not a scar, this is a tattoo. As soon as they realize it is a tattoo, you can see how the mind changes. They proudly display that tattoo, which is sometimes like a sword, which is arrow. So there are fascinating aspects to how children react to various things. Next, please. Okay, so any quick answers about what is this? What is this bird defect? I'm going to pause for 4 seconds. Please bear with me, organizers, as far as time is concerned. But the good part about webinar is we can go on and take few minutes more.
Yes, so we have
Okay,
one
and Dr.
answer.
Deep,
Yeah.
yes, I have seen that. There are two answers. In fact, this answer when I show this slide immediately after the exam fellow slide, because everybody thinks this is gastroschisis, which is a defect next to the umbilicus and where the intestines come out, which is correct. That is what gastroschisis is. But this slide is not gastroschisis. This is a 1.5-month girl whose abdomen I have opened and have taken out the intestines of this child, and you can see a nice ileal duplication cyst. Sanchita, next. Just next lines of this slide. So this is an ileal duplication cyst, and this was eminently detected antenatally as an intra-abdominal cyst. We had some differential diagnosis, but postnatally, the ultrasound confirmed the ileal duplication cyst. Next slide, please. Okay, quick answers about what is this birth defect. Any answers on what is this? I'll give you 2 seconds, 3 seconds more. It's not a major looking birth defect, but it certainly is. Okay, somebody, Dr. Lal Chand Dhoka has said this is coloboma. Okay, okay, Sanchita, go on to the next animation of this slide. Well, this is aniridia. Okay, the iris is absent. Now, this causes photophobia, but sometimes there can be hidden conditions associated with aniridia. Sanchita, next, please. So you can have a large Wilms tumor which developed in this child with aniridia. Next, please, Sanchita. So here you see a large Wilms tumor of the kidney. So sometimes there can be telltale small signs which can tell you what may happen additionally to children who have some small minor birth defects which are not life threatening. Next, please. Okay. After those pictures and those quick answers, and I must say that you have also learned, all of you, to use Zoom and give answers and use the chat section very well. The prevalence of birth defects in across the world, the highest incidence in prevalence is in Southeast Asia and some parts of Africa. Here is a slide which shows the prevalence in Southeast Asia region, and as you can probably know or anticipate, the tallest bar chart in this is India. So among Southeast Asian countries, India has the highest incidence of birth defects, and therefore our response, if you belong to this. Next, please. Next slide. We saw the types of birth defects. Then we saw the etiology of birth defects. But birth defects be a major public health issue. And as I said, the PSBI, now since the last 5-6 years, the WHO is increasingly focusing its attention on birth defects, which have now become a major cause of neonatal and infant mortality figures in India. So now if we want to decrease the infant mortality figures in India further, they are still quite high. In fact, I don't know, maybe all of you have read, today itself the infant mortality figures of India were released, and our national number is 32, which is also very, very high. So I think if we have to reduce mortality, then we have to focus on proper diagnosis, prevention, and care of birth defects. Next, please. One, we need not dwell too much on this, but apart from all the other aspects of birth defects can have a huge social and economic impact on society, on families, on the country. Especially a birth defect which is lifelong and which results in a significant but not so worrisome disability like a neural tube defect. It can have a enormous social and economic impact, especially in a country like ours where very little help comes from the state. Next, please. Next slide. Okay. So I'm not going to ask a question on this because this is a birth defect which is everyone knows and everyone is fascinated by, and these are conjoined twins. And they are a conjoined twin with two separate heads, a fused chest, abdomen, thoracoomphalopagus. And this child was referred to me some years back by from an maternity home in a distant Bombay suburb. And the obstetrician rang me up and said, "Sir, this is the picture, this child is born, and we want to send the child to you." So, of course, when you have a conjoined twin coming to you, then it's a very glamorous birth defect. If you get a admission of this type of birth defect, you are sure to be in the news next day, and there will be reporters and photographers. So we were all set to receive this baby, and we had accumulated and got a team ready to try and plan the treatment. 2 days elapsed and there was no sign of this baby. So I rang up the obstetrician and he said, the family believes this is an incarnation of God. Sanchita, can you swipe to the next animation? And they wanted to take the child back to their native place. And the obstetrician told me, "Sir, you won't believe, there is a long queue outside my nursing home to take darshan of this God which is born." So there are so many other aspects which decide treatment and prognosis and the future of birth defects. Next, please. And as we are talking of that, it brings us to another fascinating aspect of birth defect, and that is ethical issues. We can't go into details today, but this is something which holds a lot of interest and fascination. And there are countries in this world, unfortunately so, who allow active and passive euthanasia for birth defects. And one crazy country is Netherlands, because it not only allows passive euthanasia, but if there is a child with spina bifida in the Netherlands, they may allow active euthanasia, active killing of this child who was born with spina bifida. And I think that is so, so tragic. But Netherlands is a crazy country. In that country, you can go on the street and you can buy a drink which is flavored with marijuana through a vending machine. So, do you think euthanasia is allowed in India? Is it prevalent in India? Well, it's certainly not allowed. Thankfully, it's illegal. Next slide, please, Sanchita. But passive euthanasia in India is illegal. But unfortunately, friends, it is a reality and it is done in India. 2 years ago, I was called to operate on a TOF girl in Aurangabad, and we did. In fact, we had two patients, a boy from another family, same tracheoesophageal fistula, whose operation went on successfully. Next day, we had this girl, but the family went into a huddle and decided and told us we don't want her to be treated. Now, tracheoesophageal fistula, if the operation is done, there is no disability. It's a completely curable condition. And denying treatment to a girl, to a child, is nothing else but passive euthanasia. So we have to look at this. The Spina Bifida Foundation and GoFolic has initiated some steps to look into legalities of filing a PIL about passive euthanasia in India. The girl child and birth defects has a peculiar relationship. I was stunned many years back as a resident doctor in KEM hospital when a poor farmer family got their third born girl child and with spina bifida and said that the name of this girl child is Nakoshi. That means unwanted. So it is very tragic. Next slide, please. So the Maharashtra government some years ago got all the Nakoshis of Maharashtra together and launched a big renaming ceremony of these unfortunate girls who were labeled as Nakoshis by their own parents. Next slide, please. Some statistics about the incidence of various birth defects in India. As you can see, and you can feel free to take screenshots of whatever slides you feel you may want to store and keep. But again, as you can see, spina bifida and anencephaly top the list. And then you have the others which we spoke of. Next slide, please. Okay, so here is a big bubble on the back. And antenatally, this was of course picked up and of course diagnosed. And it was a spina bifida case. But although very difficult, I decided to stick my neck out and tell the parents to be that most probably, I'm not 100% sure, nobody can be, but this looks like a plain meningocele and your child may not have a significant neurological deficit. This is something is nothing else than sticking your neck out because you can never be too sure. So in spina bifida, antenatal counseling, you have to be very careful. But we will do a webinar soon to talk about details of neural tube defects, antenatal aspects, counseling, etc. Sanchita, go ahead. So this was a large go back please. This was a large meningocele and thankfully for me, had no neurological deficit. Next, please. What is the incidence of neural tube defect in India? I think we did put up some slides earlier, but since this is an important thing to know, I'm going to pause for 4 seconds and see whether somebody gives an answer. So can you answer? Somebody says 40%. I mean, 40% of what? What is the incidence? So let me tell you, incidence is defined as X per 1,000 live births. So how many do you think in 1,000 live births, how many children are born with neural tube defect? So let's see if somebody can give a figure. Okay, somebody from Pregna Care has answered. Okay, I'm happy we are getting more or less correct answer. So, okay, let's go to the next slide. So people said 4 per 1,000, and broadly it is acceptable then if you collect all the data. Now, one thing we must know is India does not keep a birth defects registry. It is so tragic. So we cannot be 100% sure. And all the publications are not based on population data, but they are based on hospital data. So you have a range variation from state to state. And this is a slide you must probably take a screenshot from multiple sources. And you see on the right hand side, you have a state like Haryana, where an incidence of 181 per 10,000, mind you. So about 18 per 1,000 is mentioned. In Maharashtra, it is 2.5 per 1,000. And go to the extreme left end, in Assam, it is less than 0.5 per 1,000. So there is a varied incidence of neural tube defects in India. And maybe there are some reasons why this is so. Next slide. But if you combine all the data, then as was rightly answered by some panelists, the conservative incidence comes to about 4.1 per 1,000. Even if we consider 4 per 1,000, we are looking at more than 25-30,000 cases of neural tube defects born in India every year. Next, please, Sanchita, swipe. So, neural tube defects is a problem of epidemic proportions. And let us realize that, of course, and in this today's context, I'm very happy that we are calling epidemic proportion, because today we are all realizing what is an epidemic. So when COVID goes away, when the epidemic of COVID goes away, let us look at the epidemic of neural tube defects, please. Next, please. So we have, if we know how to prevent neural tube defects, then we have the potential of preventing, as I said, more than 25,000 children born with spina bifida and childhood paralysis each year. Next, please. Next slide, yeah. And it is useful to come neural tube defects with polio, because both cause similar paralysis. But the Pulse Polio campaign is, everybody knows about it. Everybody knows prevention of polio when there are not even a handful of cases of polio. But neural tube defects, we said more than 25,000. But where is the Pulse folic acid campaign? I think the country needs to focus on the Pulse folic acid campaign as soon as COVID goes away, which may not be very soon, but we have to live with viruses. Next, please. And okay, what causes neural tube defects? We all know folic acid. Next slide. Folic acid can prevent up to 70% of neural tube defects. But if you add, and there is increasing evidence about this, if you add B12 to folic acid, the prevention can be up to 85% of neural tube defects can be prevented. I need not talk about the difficulty of preconception folic acid and the importance of taking folic acid much before conception. I'm sure all of you are aware about it, but there are some difficulties because you may not know when the lady has become pregnant. So many pregnancies are unplanned. So there is difficulty in implementing a successful preconceptional folic acid supplementation program in any part of the world. And here, interestingly, a country which is very much in the news stands out today, and that is China. There was a time in China when you had to take permission of the municipal authorities before. So there, a preconceptional folic acid program, but thankfully, all countries are not like that. Next slide. Apart from folic acid, next slide, please. Apart from folic acid, there are certain other factors known to have a higher incidence of neural tube defects. Hyperthermia is one. And that's why the incidence in Kutch, and somebody had asked a question about Gujarat, is Kutch incidence is high. Deserts of Rajasthan incidence is high. And that is why women in Europe are advised not to take warm tub bath during pregnancy. There is an interesting correlation between blighted potato, sada hua aloo, and neural tube defects. And we all know the correlation of eptoin, anticonvulsant, and neural tube defects. Next, please. Let me go a bit fast because we are almost 30-40 minutes down, and one more talk and speaker is patiently waiting. So these are maternal risk factors, and again, as obstetricians, a pediatric surgeon need not talk to you about these. But as far as nutritional factors, and the ones in green are important, we did mention folic acid, we did mention B12, and later in pregnancy and later in infancy, there is a role of DHA for development of the central nervous system, of the brain and maturation. And that's why DHA is also green in this slide. It is not to prevent neural tube defects. Next, please. Why do we need more folic acid as a supplementation? Why not just have more folic acid rich foods and take care of the need of folic acid and requirement of folic acid? And this is one very interesting slide, and maybe you want to take some snapshots of this. If you had to get 400 microgram equivalent of folic acid, then a pregnant or a lady will have to take 17.5 cups of orange juice every day, or she will have to eat 200 medium red apples, or she will have to take 5.5 cups of beans. So it's impossible to get adequate folic acid in natural diet. And I sometimes, when I talk on this line, I wonder whether there is something in nature, some vegetable, some fruit, which you can just consume few slices of or small portion and get 400 microgram. I'm sure nature can't be so stupid as to not have something like this. Probably we have not found out. Next slide, please. So ensuring adequate levels of folates in mother, it is easier said than done. We said many pregnancies are unplanned, and so the woman will not take folic acid before conceiving, and this happens across the developed and developing world. And there are ways to get over this problem. Go on, Sanchita, next please. Such as fortification of food, and we will not dwell into this in this talk. Next please. Okay, the mainstay of diagnosing fetal malformations is the anomaly USG scan. And let me run through this. We can talk more about anomaly scan, and maybe we'll have some anomaly scan and birth defect, but maybe at a future opportunity. Next slide. Ultrasound in India today is available all across small towns and big cities. Everywhere ultrasound is available. It is almost like a public PCO booth. So there are, I shouldn't call them booths, but ultrasound is available everywhere. What is important is how it is done, when it is done, how much time one spends to do an anomaly scan so that we don't miss out anomaly. Half of the children who come to me with a spina bifida, even now, are not detected antenatally, which is surprisingly very high. Next, please. So this is a okay. This is a slide which deals with antenatal diagnosis of neural tube defects. Can somebody quickly tell me? But otherwise, we'll go ahead. This depicts the banana sign, the lemon sign, and spinach as a source of folic acid. Next, please. Next line. So here is an antenatal picture of the lemon sign. Many times spina bifida is picked up in the skull and not the spine. And this is a very, very definitive diagnostic sign of a neural tube defect. A lemon-shaped skull. Of course, this is not an Indian lemon. Indian lemons are more circular or oval. They don't have pits like this. And this is a European lemon. Next slide. Here is again a slide showing the lemon sign and posterior skull showing the compressed cerebellar hemisphere, which depict the banana sign. Next, please. Okay, let me come to another fascinating aspect related to neural tube defects. And this is the famous management of meningomyelocele study trial, which went on in the USA and which dealt with the question of fetal surgery for meningomyelocele. Next slide. The trial was closed before it ended because they quickly were able to establish the obvious benefits of fetal surgery for meningomyelocele. And now, next slide, please. And now, next, fetal surgery is now an established option across the world given to parents if they have a antenatally detected neural tube defect. We are on the threshold of starting fetal surgery, especially for this condition, because it is now proven that it reduces hydrocephalus, it reverses the Arnold-Chiari malformation, and it may have significantly better neurological outcomes if the child undergoes surgery before birth. Next, please. So I visited this leading European center, which does the maximum amount of fetal surgeries in December this last year, and to familiarize myself with the various aspects. And believe me, it's not very difficult. And we were on the threshold of beginning this program but then COVID has put paid to a lot of our plans. Next, please. So here are some slides from Poland Center. A hysterotomy is done and they use a laser to do the hysterotomy so that there is less bleeding. And then the fetus is manipulated and delivered. Next slide. Fetus back is delivered and you can see the bubble coming out of the uterus, which is the meningomyelocele. And the operation is done by the pediatric surgeon. And she did a wonderful operation and closed this back like we would do after birth. A continuous amnio infusion is going on so that the fetus is always continuously submerged in amniotic fluid, which is of course saline, and the amnio infusion at the end of the operation is completed and the hysterotomy closed in multiple layers. We will do a seminar on fetal surgery, I hope, sooner than later. Next, please. Okay, let me come to the end and just talk to you. Then, believe me, neural tube defects is not a very gloomy abnormality. And I, for one, having seen and managed many over the years, have a very positive outlook as far as neural tube defects is concerned. Next, please. Here are all of our patients, members of the foundation who are leading very active, successful lives, who were born with major spina bifida. They have been given gold medals for their sports recently by the Chief Minister of Maharashtra. These two girls seen in this picture, one of them on the left has just got married last month, and the other one is soon going to get married. They had major urinary incontinence issues which have been tackled. They are socially completely continent. Here is a gentleman who's a DJ who comes from Rajasthan who has spina bifida. We have adults who are lawyers from Calcutta, from Delhi. We have an orthopedic surgeon who had urinary incontinence and some degree of weakness in the lower limb, who's an orthopedic surgeon in Pune. We have a software expert professional who's wheelchair dependent, who lives in Chennai, and she works for a major software company. She last year gave birth to a pretty normal girl, and she's got married, and she does ramp shows on her wheelchair. So believe me, if you give the right guidance, right counseling, right treatment for neural tube defects, their lives need not be very, gloomy as it is believed, So please connect with the foundation. Please connect with us and with our helpline. Next slide, please. Do we have the helpline slide? Okay, so let me introduce you to the president of our international federation. Dr. Margot Whiteford was born with spina bifida. She is a pediatric geneticist, a leading doctor from Glasgow, and one of the most fashionable ladies I've met. Whenever she stitches a costume for herself, she has a similar costume for her wheelchair. So she is not just a great doctor, she's a fashionable lady as well, and has been featured in fashion magazines across the United Kingdom. So it is all in the mind. If you want, you can make an excellent life out of any deformity, any anomaly. Of course, you need a healthy mind. And the silver lining to neural tube defect is that all of them will and can have a completely productive, normal mind. So when you encounter a neural tube defect, just call up this helpline and seek guidance. Next, please. Okay, thank you very much. I think I have exceeded my time a little bit, but please bear with me. And I hope you also give enough time to the next speaker, who's also going to talk on some great relevant aspects concerning COVID. And if there is there some time for a few questions, or we will do that later? Arshia or Sanchita?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
We have a question from a participant.
Okay, let's just take one or two questions, not more.
Yeah, I'll just read out. Is only
Yeah.
folic acid supplementation sufficient for reducing birth defects?
Is only
Folic acid supplementation sufficient for reducing birth defects?
Folic acid supplementation taken preconceptionally is more than sufficient to reduce neural tube defects. Not all birth defects, but neural tube defects, you can prevent 85% of them if you take folic acid preconception and periconception. Any other question?
Yes, Mr. Bhupender wants to ask whether birth defects is a sickle cell, is it?
Birth defect is a
Is a sickle cell defined under birth defects?
no. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Any defect, whether it is physiological, functional, metabolic, structural, is a birth defect. So you can have an enzyme which is missing in a RBC, and that's also a birth defect. If it's from birth, if it's congenital, it is a birth defect. But it is not something we pediatric surgeons would deal with. There is one more question: is progesterone as a vaginal suppository safe? Well, if it's absorbed then and it goes into the bloodstream, then it may have the same effects like ingested progesterone as far as its correlation with hypospadias is concerned. Any other question? Yeah, so I think this is the same question which we answered. Any one more last question, please, if there is, otherwise we stop. Okay, I think we'll stop. Sanchita, over to you, and a warm welcome from my side to Dr. Amit Patki, eminent leading obstetrician. Hi, Amit. Sorry I've taken a little bit time, but please feel free to go on. We'll all be listening to your talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Santosh Karmarkar. It was very informative session, and thank you for joining us today. Now, I would like to welcome Dr. Amit Patki. Dr. Amit Patki is a medical director of Fertility Associate Center for Assisted Reproduction in Mumbai, former medical director, Regenesis Center for Assisted Reproduction, Endoscopy and Fetal Medicine, Reliance Life Sciences, Mumbai. He is also honorary associate professor at the KJ Somaiya Medical College, Hospital and Research Center, and a consultant obstetrician and gynecologist at Hinduja Surgicals Healthcare and Surya Hospital in Mumbai. So I welcome Dr. Amit Patki for his session. Over to Dr. Amit Patki.
Thank you very much, and allow me to. Can you allow me to share my presentation?
Yes, sir. I think it is disconnected, so you can start with your presentation.
Okay, so a very good evening to you all, and at the onset, I would like to thank Mayor Organics, Vita Biotics, and Dr. Santosh Karmarkar for inviting me into this session, and thank you to Mrs. Uma from Mayor Organics for having me here. I think we are all going through this pandemic, and the women I'm very concerned are the pregnant women. Fortunately, FOXI, which is a Federation of Obstetrics and Gynecological Societies of India, having over 35,000 members, has come out with a good clinical practice guidelines for doctors who are looking after pregnant women in this pandemic. We are gripped in this pandemic, and it is very important, and naturally we all are worried, the patient as well as the doctors. I will take you through a gist of the scientific document that is made for facilitating management of pregnant women with suspected or confirmed COVID-19 infection. As we all know, this novel coronavirus is a new strain of the coronavirus, which was first identified in the Wuhan city of China. There are a number of other corona infections that have been identified before, and these have had their epidemics, mainly the SARS infection and the MERS infection. But the strange part of this COVID infection is that it has a high rate of transmission, and that is through droplets and through fomites. Interestingly, a study has shown that even the stool samples continue to show presence of this virus for at least 28 days after the first symptoms, and hence hygiene is one of the ways that we are going to try and prevent transmission to others. What are the symptoms? We all know there is fever, cough, sore throat, and if it progresses, there is difficulty in breathing, tiredness, body ache are the symptoms. Some people may have headaches, runny nose, strange symptoms like change of smell, digestive problems like nausea, diarrhea, and abdominal pains. These symptoms generally start coming 5 to 7 days after exposure. A few symptoms may develop later on, maybe 10 to 14 days later. But the biggest problem is that we have a large number of people who are asymptomatic carriers, and this is the worrying part. In case we are not going to screen everybody, we will be missing this large group of asymptomatic carriers. We all know that this problem can be most severe in the elderly group, people with low immunity, with diabetes, heart problems, and hypertension. We must understand that a pregnant woman is not more susceptible to this infection. However, if she gets this infection, because of the inherent low immunity in the woman, her outcome is going to be worse than a non-pregnant woman. Although there is very little data, but whatever data that is coming from countries which have been affected with this pandemic earlier, China, Spain, Italy, and the UK, there is no suggestion to suggest that there is an increased association of miscarriage because of this infection. At present, a direct mother-to-child transmission has not been identified, and luckily, this virus is not found in the cord blood or in the placenta. So how can healthcare persons help pregnant women? Healthcare persons must educate these women through phone calls, through displays in clinics, and encouraging them to read through internet, especially through organizations that Foxy that have come up with FAQs. We have to understand the concern of pregnant women, or logistics of reaching a doctor, and the possibility of healthcare workers and the patient catching the infection from an asymptomatic pregnant woman. And hence there is the importance of social distancing, quarantine, and isolation. Now, what are these different terms? The term quarantine is derived from an Italian language, quaranta, which means 40. And it means that you have to keep this person separate and restrict the movement of well people who are known to be exposed or suspected to be exposed to this infection, to see if in those next 40 days they become ill, and that is quarantine. It is different from isolation, which refers to the separation and restriction of movement of ill people who have this infection in order to prevent their transmitting it to others. Education about hand hygiene is the first and the foremost. Hand washing, ideally with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, making sure you clean the wrist, fingernails, thumbs, and in between the fingers. We need to rinse it with running water and then dry the hands. People always have a myth that the hand sanitizer works as effective. In fact, hand washing with soap and water is much more effective. And hand sanitizer is for somebody who doesn't have access to frequent washing their hands, like healthcare personnel. And the sanitizer has to have at least 70% alcohol for it to have the desired effect. After hand wash or after sanitizing, it is important to avoid touching those fingers to your nose, to your face, mouth, or eyes, as fomite transmission is known. The importance of wearing a mask is that it prevents you from touching your nose, mouth, and the face, and also prevents the droplets from spreading around. So what is respiratory hygiene? It is a term used to describe effective preventive measures to decrease spread of respiratory infections. When a person coughs, the droplets can go, we thought, to 3 feet, but now with more studies done, we know that in some people who can cough very hard, it can go to almost 9 feet. These droplets, unfortunately, are alive for a few hours to a few days, depending on the variety of objects that they land on. So doorknobs, bed rails, wheelchairs, patient care equipment, they last for days. And on certain other surfaces, they can last for a few hours, or on the clothes, they can last for a few hours. So in case you have to cough, you have to cough in between your elbow when you're wearing some clothes, so that the cough doesn't go right up to 9 feet. And this is also called as a cough etiquette. So cover your mouth with a handkerchief or ideally a mask now. Turn away from the crowd when you're coughing. Wear a mask, especially the whole day if you are having a cold or a runny nose. Cough in between your fold of the elbow. And more importantly for us Indians, do not spit in public spaces, because that is another very big problem of transmission of infection. A quick guide for healthcare workers is when you're working in a triage area or a general clinic, it is very important that you have a disposable cap, a mask, and you wear disposable gloves. The mask that you wear in a normal clinic can be a 3-ply mask. If you are dealing with suspect or confirmed COVID patients, then an N95 mask along with eye goggles or a face shield is very important. If you are doing any surgical procedures where the COVID test is still not come, or you're performing a delivery of a suspect, because everybody is a suspect, in case if they are not tested, or in a confirmed infection, COVID patient, a full PPE kit with a body suit and face shield, goggles, and an N95 mask is important not only for you, but for your assistant and the nursing staff. Now, what are the changes that we make in looking after a pregnant woman? The first and the important is that there are certain visits which are important. So like the first trimester visit at 11, 12 weeks, a visit at 20 weeks, and then a visit between 28 to 32 weeks are the most important visits. And these visits are mandatory even during the lockdown period. The rest of the visits can be avoided for majority of women who are at low risk. And these visits can be timed with a sonography wherever it is available. At the end of first trimester is the NT scan, where you pick up all neural tube defects, and a blood test to make sure that you're not dealing with the most common chromosome abnormalities. A 20-week scan or a anomaly scan, which will pick up the rest of the majority of abnormalities or structural anomalies, and a growth scan at 28 to 32 weeks, which will pick up if there is any growth restriction or discrepancy in the growth. Unless if you're dealing with a high risk woman, an elderly woman, or a woman with preeclampsia or hypertension or previous high risk factors, I think these visits are important, essential, and mandatory, and we could go with this till the lockdown period is indicated. What about vaccines? Tetanus toxoid or the TD vaccine as we give now, and the Tdap vaccine should be taken as per the schedule. The current flu vaccine that we give all pregnant women will take care of other influenza viruses. However, it will not protect them from the COVID-19 infection, because as you all know and I know, there is no vaccine yet for the COVID-19. So the next important thing for them to improve their immunity is good food containing vitamin C, antioxidants, and if it is possible for them to take supplements which are known to improve their immunity, I think Mayor Organic makes something like Immune Ace Fort, which contains high dose of folic acid, vitamin C, selenium, which will kick in the immunity in these women. Some form of exercise, exposure to sunlight, and yoga and adequate rest for these women is important, and social distancing, as we all know, can help them boost their immunity. Pregnant women are told not to self-medicate. It is important to tell them not to take any drugs containing NSAIDs for minor headaches, flus, but rather get to the doctor who will prescribe them maybe on the telephone. What happens if a family member has COVID? What should be done? I think it is important to isolate this member from rest of the family members. It is important to see that they have a room exclusive for themselves and they have separate toilet facilities. If this is not possible, I think such a patient should be admitted into a COVID observation hospitals, which are presently being developed in various cities. They should wear a mask, ideally an N95 mask, and make sure that they are separate, especially from the pregnant woman. But sometimes in a nuclear family, it may be that a pregnant woman herself has to look after such an infected person. Then she also should be wearing an N95 mask whenever she is in close contact with this person. Washing hands with soap and water cannot be more emphasized. Wear disposable latex gloves when you are serving food to this person or when you're touching this person, and make sure that this infected person's laundry utensils are all washed separately. Make sure that the house is sanitized. If we have access to sodium hypochlorite, I think 10% sodium hypochlorite is an effective disinfectant to clean all surfaces, doorknobs, to also make sure that we clean all surfaces wherever this person is exposed. Be positive. Avoid watching too much of this COVID news, because that itself can create anxiety and depression in pregnant women. Avoid unnecessary travels. Keep your doctor's numbers and other emergency numbers handy. Make sure you have a healthy diet. Make sure that social distancing is done. Make sure you don't unnecessarily call people and have your baby showers, and such rituals should be completely avoided in this pandemic. And women, even if the non-COVID state, should be strictly told to avoid smoking and alcohol. Quite often they are in their second pregnancies, they have the elder child to look after, and it is important that they try and engage with this child because they also have to look after that young one and his needs. What about prophylaxis of the healthcare worker? Pregnant women as such do not need to take any medicines for pharmacoprophylaxis. At the present, the ICMR has advised healthcare workers who are exposed to COVID patients or working in wards where suspected COVID patients are kept to take the hydrochloroquine, which is given as a loading dose of 400 milligrams twice a day on the first day, and then 400 milligrams weekly for the next 7 days. If a healthcare worker is pregnant, then she can take this hydrochloroquine in pregnancy. It is known to be safe. But if it's just a pregnant woman who is not in contact with any COVID patient, is not a healthcare worker, there is no need to give her any pharmacoprophylaxis. If the patients are elderly patients, it is worth start doing an ECG to rule out any abnormalities before putting them on this HCQ. How do you manage labor? I think there should be a designated labor suite for COVID patients where only COVID patients are delivered, and this should be separate from a routine labor ward where patients have been already tested before and found to be COVID negative. Even by the ICMR guidelines, every pregnant patient around 36 to 37 weeks of a pregnancy should be offered the COVID testing so that we are prepared when she comes in labor. Minimize the number of people who are with this patient, and also routine monitoring is important even in a COVID positive patient, which means the fetal heart rate should be monitored every hourly. Her vitals have to be monitored every hourly in the active phase. Otherwise, the patient can be seen 3 to 4 hourly. If your hospital is offering them the Entonox or the nitrous oxide gas as labor analgesia, make sure that it is a single-use filter that is used, which can be disposed of before the next patient uses the same cylinder. Water births are completely contraindicated in COVID patients. There is a controversy regarding the cutting of the cord. Some organizations feel that delayed clamping is advisable. However, some other organizations have advised immediate cord clamping. Important is to cut down the second stage of labor. We do not want a tired patient or a patient who can land up with postpartum hemorrhage, and hence, especially in a COVID positive patient, our threshold for taking up patients for prolonged labor for cesarean section should be lowered so that we cut down a prolonged labor, especially a prolonged second stage, in which case we can do an instrumental delivery for this baby. If we have to take a patient for a cesarean section, a COVID positive patient, I think it has to be a designated operation theater. Again, minimize the number of people in the OT. Make sure that the people are not going in and out during the surgery, have to remain in the theater with a complete PPE protection. A regional spinal anesthesia is preferred. If general anesthesia unfortunately has to be given for other comorbidities, then ensure negative pressure in the operation theater throughout the procedure, and especially at extubation where the virus can get into the aerosols. Remember, a crash section is not possible in these patients, so preempt problems before, inform the team before, so that the anesthesia team and the rest of the nursing staff also gets time to to don the PPE kit because it takes a while before the whole team is ready in a PPE. The post-operative care is exactly the same as you would do for a non-COVID patient. Is breastfeeding allowed? Yes, I think breastfeeding should be permitted even in a COVID positive patient, the mother taking adequate precautions by wearing a mask each time the baby is with her, because we know that the benefits of proper nutrition and presence of antibodies in the breast milk will outweigh the benefits, outweigh the risks, and will protect this child from other illnesses. Hand washing, wear of mask, making sure that she washes her hand thoroughly before feeding or handling the baby is extremely important. Post delivery, maintain good personal and hand hygiene. She will have to practice social distancing. Again, avoid major celebrations and gathering for any naming ceremony. I think all this can be put off till the lockdown is over, and because you will also have to take good care of the public at large. What about care of the newborns? I think the newborns should be in the hands of good pediatricians and neonatologists. Newborns born to mothers with COVID infection within 14 days of delivery or up to 28 days of birth need to be tested for COVID, or symptomatic neonates when they are exposed to close contacts with COVID need to be tested. In newborns, you take again upper respiratory nasopharyngeal swab. In newborns who are mechanically ventilated, the tracheal aspirate can be collected and sent for testing for the COVID infection. If the newborn is asymptomatic and roomed in, test only if the mother's COVID test comes positive. I hope I've covered a large of your concerns and anxiety. I think it is important that we counsel our patients, we counsel the couple, we understand that we have to take care not only of ourselves, but we have to take care of our patients, of our staff, and also of the patient. Thank you very much.
Hello. Thank you so much, Dr. Patki, for the most recent updates on pregnancy and COVID conditions. Now we'll begin with the question and answer session. We'll have few questions from the participants. Arshia, please read if there is any question from the participant.
Yeah, hello, sir.
Yeah.
A woman waiting for a C-section has non-conclusive test should go through section or should be shifted to COVID center.
What do you mean by non-conclusive test? If the test is non-conclusive, she has to be treated as a COVID positive patient, and if you have facilities to manage COVID patients in that hospital, or else she'll have to be shifted to a hospital which can look after COVID patients.
Okay. Another one, surface disinfection is 1% or 10% sodium hypochlorite.
It's 10% sodium hypochlorite.
Okay. And what is the role of macro and micronutrient in utero programming?
Yeah, so now it is very important that in a pregnant woman, because inherently her immune system will be little low because she has a foreign body in her that is growing, and that is why there is a role of micronutrients and macronutrients. So food which is adequate in proteins is very important in the pregnant stage, because we need proteins as building blocks for muscles and for the baby growth. As far as micronutrients and vitamins are concerned, vitamins which will enhance or boost their immune system, like vitamin C, selenium, vitamin D, and micronutrients like are necessary, and these are now available as a tablet form which these patients can be encouraged to take.
Yeah. So since immunity reduces during pregnancy, which supplement should be recommended during pandemic?
Yeah, so there are now ready tablets which contain the range of all micronutrients like Pregnacare or Pregnacare Forte. But in patients who have got COVID positive, in addition to this, they can take high dose of micronutrients like immune ACE tablets, which contain high dose of vitamin C, selenium, barium, which are all micronutrients which will boost the immune system.
Yes, two to go. Recommendations for newborn testing.
Yeah, so as I said, if the mother is negative, there is no testing to be done. If the mother is positive within 15 days of delivery, before 15 days, or till 28 days after delivery, the newborn has to be tested. A newborn who is asymptomatic but develops symptoms, even if the mother is negative, needs to be tested for COVID. In a COVID positive mother, if the newborn comes, first report comes negative, I think it is important to wait for at least 48 hours before you do the second test for the newborn.
Okay. Can COVID positive mother pass the virus to fetus through placenta?
Yes. So now the vertical transmission is not known. There are very, very few uh, reports. So from whatever is coming, there is no risk of vertical transmission. There was no virus found in the cord blood or in the placenta from studies which are coming. But you must understand that this is something which is very new to us. We have to wait to get more reports and more numbers which will conclusively prove or disprove that vertical transmission is not happening.
Okay. Again,
Now, there is the risk of vertical transmission is extremely low.
yeah. So two more questions to go. Can the vitamin D3 loading dose be given to in first trimester?
Yes, you can give vitamin D3 loading dose, and there are reports to suggest that vitamin D3 supplementation is one of the methods that we can boost the immune system in any person. So those with very severely low vitamin D3 and calcium, I think it is important in this pandemic to supplement such patients so that their immune system is rejuvenated or activated.
Yeah. So do we need to test all the patients prior to elective surgery, though they are asymptomatic?
Yeah, so now there is a little discrepancy between what ICMR is saying and what hospitals are actually requiring. All hospitals presently, to the best of my knowledge, are needing a COVID test before you take the patient up for any surgery. Unless if the surgery is life threatening, you cannot wait for the reports because often it takes 24 to 36 hours to get the report. Then I think all such patients should be assumed to be COVID positive and the required precautions to be taken.
I think this is the last one, I guess. Is post-operative complications are more?
No, as I said, a pregnant patient is not more susceptible to COVID infection, but if she gets COVID infection, her outcome is slightly poorer than a non-pregnant woman. The post-op complications, again, are not anything different from a non-COVID patient, but we have to be extremely careful that she doesn't get any super added infections, especially respiratory care is very, very important.
Just a last one again. Can sustain 200 BD vaginally can be continued in first trimester along with the folic acid and other supplements in COVID-19 positive case?
Yeah, so now, there was a question whether progesterone causes congenital malformations. Now, progesterone depends which progesterone you are using. There is no report to suggest that micronized progesterone or dydrogesterone increases the risk of congenital malformations. However, if you are using any other progesterones like 19-nor testosterones or progesterones with estrogenic actions, then such progesterones can cause teratogenicity. So barring micronized progesterone, which sustain is micronized progesterone or digogesterone, these are safe in the first trimester and can be given to a COVID positive patient also.
So there are two questions. I'll combine these two. So betadine gargles or spray is useful, or do you recommend omega-3 supplementation to a COVID pregnant woman?
Yeah, so omega supplementation is good for any COVID patient because it is free fatty acids and essential fatty acids. As far as betadine gargles and spray, if the person has got some cough, then I think salt water gargling, drinking hot milk, or drinking milk with turmeric may be better than using betadine. Now, all cough is not COVID. You must understand this. So betadine gargles can be done, but the COVID infection is not going to go up with betadine gargles.
Okay, sir, that's it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Patki, for addressing the questions of our participants. We have reached to end of our today's sessions. I'm sure today's session was very useful and informative for all the doctors attending the webinar. Once again, I would like to thank our esteemed speaker, Dr. Santosh Karmarkar and Dr. Amit Patki. It was indeed my honor to host this session. We have doctors participating from Australia, Nigeria, Kenya, Indonesia, Nepal, and many other countries. Thank you all for our listeners for attending this webinar. I also thank Mayor Vita Biotics for sponsoring this webinar, and thank you so much. Hope to see you all in our next webinars. Good night.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It was informative to me as well. Thank you.